Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the Gifts for Glory podcast. I'm your host, Dave Weaver. Got a really fun episode for you this week. And here on the Gifts for Glory podcast, if you're new to the program, if you're listening for the first time ever, we are all about celebrating and promoting men and women using their gifts, talents, and passions to honor and glorify God. That's what Gifts for Glory Ministries is about. That's what I love to do. I love to partner with people and get their message out there, their story out there, because we need more positive influences. We need more sources of inspiration and hope and entertainment. That's why we have Well-Versed Comedy, and Well-Versed Comedy is our improv ministry. If you're not familiar with that, we have a group of 5 people, myself and 4 ladies, and we are potentially, I would say fingers crossed, but we don't believe in fingers crossing. We believe in the cross. So Lord willing, we will be adding a new member in the upcoming weeks. But right now we are at just myself and the 4 ladies, and we have a blast on stage, and the audience has a blast with us. So as you're listening to this podcast, we're rounding out the month of October, getting ready for the holiday season, and also looking forward to 2020 already. So if you have an event coming up and you're looking for clean, family-friendly entertainment, something that's going to engage your group, whether you have volunteers you want to celebrate, whether you want to just do a fundraiser, a date night, a youth event, that's what Well-Versed Comedy is all about, is bringing clean, family-friendly entertainment. We have some very strong men and women of faith, and we will be absolutely blessed and thrilled to share a testimony or share a devotion as part of our performance. Or if you want us to bring the comedy and set up for somebody else to deliver a message, we can do that as well. Wellversedcomedy.com. Wellversedcomedy.com is how you can get a hold of us and see if we would be a great fit and a great addition to your next event. Wellversedcomedy.com. We're also just recently launching our Patreon page. We're still growing and developing it, but if you like what we do, if you like our mission, if you like PureFest, Well-Versed Comedy, Gifts of Glory Ministries, and the different things that I do personally, teaching improv at a shelter for women who've survived sex trafficking, if you want to get involved and help support us, we have a Patreon page. It's patreon.com/gifts4glory. That's patreon.com/gifts, the number 4, glory. And that way you can get involved and help support us at any rate that you'd like. We would love to have you. We give you a couple of perks along the way. We are trying to get to nonprofit status. So anything that you can give to help support us as we fill out all the paperwork, file all the paperwork, pay all the registration fees, anything you can do to help us would be greatly appreciated in allowing us to pursue the vision and the mission that we feel God has called us to. Speaking of God, the most important part and the most important reason that we do this podcast and we do all the different things we do is God. We want to honor and glorify God in all things. So right now we're going to take you to our Devotions with Dave segment, which is me. We are working on developing this a little bit more, but I wanted to add a devotional segment to each one of my podcasts. So we're going to get to that segment right now, the Devotions with Dave segment. So on this week's Devotions with Dave, I wanted to read a couple of verses that I was inspired to share in church this last week. The week before, we had 5 of our kids in children's church say the prayer and accept Christ as Savior, and we went before the church at the end of service to proclaim these 5 new salvations. And then the following week, which was this past week, I was able to open with the call to worship. And because of those kids, I wanted to share these 2 scriptures, and I thought they would fit here this week. So first I want to read from 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12. Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. So that one was really important for me to share, especially for those kids during the call to worship. And I also wanted to share with them this verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13. This one is often misinterpreted and misquoted, but here is the verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. A lot of people will quote that verse as saying, God will not give you more than you can handle. I completely disagree with that, because if you could handle everything, where's your need for God then? Sometimes He allows you to make decisions and walk into things that require Him, that you cannot do in your own strength. That's what the Holy Spirit is for. That's what God relishes in showing His strength in our weaknesses. So He doesn't, or let me rephrase it. It's not true to say God does not allow you to have more than you can handle. What it is true to say is He does not allow the sin or the temptation to sin to overtake you. He provides a way out. Sometimes that way out can be painful. It can seem hard. It can seem darn near impossible. But temptation is not sin. You always have a choice. You have a choice not to sin. You have a choice to turn away from that temptation and walk away, run away, sprint away from it. He's always going to provide a way out. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be fun. And sometimes it's going to take a little bit of prayer and reliance on God to find that way out. So those two verses are really important. I wanted to share those for our new young believers at church, and I also wanted to reshare them here today. Again, that was 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12. An admonition to Timothy directly, and also an admonition to all readers who would get this message, that we should not look down on somebody because of their age, whether that age is their spiritual age or whether that age is their physical age. Because God can use anybody that's got a willing heart. It doesn't matter if they're 9 or 99 or 999. God can use them if they have that willing heart. So we should not look down on them just because of their age, whether they're young, whether they're old, or wherever they may be, again, spiritually or physically. And again, 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation is going to overtake you. God will always provide a way out. You just have to have that fortitude to make the decision to turn away from the temptation and follow God. It's not always easy, and we do fall short, because all have fallen short of the glory of God. That's what Jesus is for. That's what His salvation is for. So those two verses, 1 Corinthians 10:13, 1 Timothy 4:12, here on the Devotions with Dave segment on the Gifts of Glory podcast. And now we'll get to our interview with Chris Staron. He's an author, he's a filmmaker, and he's also a fellow podcaster and a fellow improviser. A really fun interview with a new friend. I hope you enjoy this interview. Also hope that you consider buying his book and watching his movies. They're on Amazon Prime. You'll really be blessed by them. Here's my interview with Chris Staron on the Gifts of Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women using their gifts, talents, and passions to honor and glorify God. This week's guest, his name is Chris Staron. Chris is an award-winning filmmaker, the film Bringing Up Bobby and also Between the Walls. He's also the author of the dramatic Christian thriller Cradle Robber. And as if that wasn't enough, he's also the host of the Truce Podcast. Truce uses journalistic tools to look inside the Christian church and explore how we got to where we are and how we can do better. Context is key. And for me, that is the key phrase, because context is so often lost. Yeah. So enough about me doing the intro. Please welcome Chris Staron. Chris, welcome to the Gifts of Glory podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave. It's a thrill to be here.
Absolutely. And you are a fellow improviser as well, so we've got that in common.
Yeah.
We love context. We love the Lord. We love doing podcasts. You have a lot more experience than I do, so this may be a learning session for me. Okay. First, how long ago did your movies come out? That was the first thing I noticed when I started reading your bio. I was like, oh, he's not just a podcaster. He's got all these other things going on. So tell us a little bit about your filmmaking.
Sure. My twin brother, Nick, and I made 2 independent Christian films. We also had 2 DVDs of shorts, an animated series of DVDs called Pint-Sized Parables that are on YouTube. And then we had a series of our short student films called The Elephant. And then we ended up, we were living in Los Angeles and working in the secular world, and we always wanted to tell Christian movies, or make Christian movies that were feature length. And we'd made a bunch of shorts that were Christian movies, but it's a big jump to a feature length film. because you're talking weeks and weeks of production and like a year of editing. It's a lot of work. So my brother and I struck out and we made Between the Walls, and it was made for like $20,000. It was very, very little money. And so we couldn't hire a crew. We couldn't really, go too far to cast. But it's amazing how the Lord can use even a tiny thing like that. It's been all over the world on television and on Netflix, and so you just really never know. And then after that, we made Bringing Out Bobby, which is a comedy film about a goth kid, a young man who's in high school, whose older brother challenges him like, "Who do you think you are? And what's your relationship with God?" And he wants him to figure that stuff out before his life gets complicated. And of course, because it's a comedy, life gets complicated.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And there's a lot of laughs. We were we were volunteering with teenagers through campus life. And a lot of the kids we worked with were goth kids. And we realized that adults, especially Christian adults, were afraid of goth kids. Meanwhile, they were like the nicest, smartest kids that we worked with. And so we said, the film world doesn't really have a goth character that is likable and enjoyable. And you see that there is a human being behind all those clothes, So we made that film, and praise God, it also has been all over the world, in South Africa and in Brazil. It was translated into Portuguese. And so hopefully the Lord's out there using it. The weird thing about, doing podcasting, you just kind of throw these things out there and you have no idea what the impact is. Not at all. So, it'd be cool to be in heaven and find out what the Lord was doing with all that stuff.
Right. Absolutely. So Bringing Up Bobby was inspired by some of the kids that you're working with. Tell us a little bit about Between the Walls. What's that story? Where did that come from?
Sure. Actually, I'm not 100% sure where the idea came from. It was just this concept. We realized that a lot of people were struggling with the idea of God as a father. So we knew we wanted to do some kind of father figure character. So there's a young man who moves back home to help move his mom out of the house because it's being repossessed. And then there's this room in the basement that he finds out, or that he was never allowed into as a kid. And now he's an adult, so he's like, well, I'm going to go in there. My dad's dead. What's he going to do? So he opens up the door and finds out that his dad was audio recording everything that ever happened in the house. So there's stacks and stacks and stacks of tapes, which is just basically a catalog of all of his bad memories. Throughout the process of the film, he has to learn to be able to forgive himself and forgive his father. And eventually reconcile himself with his heavenly Father. So it's a very dramatic film. There's a couple of surprises in there, and it's not bad for a couple guys that were like 22, 23 years old when they made it. So,
how long ago was that then? Not to give away your age.
Oh yeah,
just out of here.
We made Between the Walls about 15 years ago.
Okay.
So it's been a while. Back when things were on DVD, and now it's changed a lot with streaming, which is exciting because it can get out further in the world. But it does mean that you make a lot less money, and actually we have less of an idea of where it's going because we're not shipping DVDs out. So it's kind of exciting that way, but it's also, we're getting 6 cents per hour watched on Amazon. So if somebody watches the movie all the way through, we're getting about 9 cents, which is not much money at all. It's just not much money at all. And they have to watch it from beginning to end to get that 6 cents or 9 cents. And so it's a weird time in films right now because unless you own the means of distribution, it's hard to make money. Unless you're Apple making movies for Apple, if Netflix making movies for Netflix, it's hard to make your money. Or you happen to be Disney and you're making Marvel movies. It's a really weird time. Because the payment model has changed. So my brother and I got out of the filmmaking thing just as DVDs were going down as technology. And now I've switched over to podcasting so that I can still tell stories, but I don't have the incredible expense and stress of making movies.
I can understand. I've done a couple short films, and just being a part of those productions, from the acting perspective, I could see how long that takes. I have a friend that did a feature-length film, and it is very intensive, especially when you're low budget. You don't have the resources of the fancy equipment.
Right.
So I can just imagine 10, 15 years ago how much more difficult it was. And the other thing that about the way technology is, it's a little bit easier to get out there, but because
Yeah.
it's so much easier, there's so much to compete with, so it's even harder to get your voice heard because everybody's got a video out.
Right, and nobody wants to pay for entertainment anymore, which is a big switch. You know,
Hmm.
you used to go to Hollywood Video or Blockbuster and rent a DVD. It wasn't that much money, but then the filmmaker got paid, and now, if it's on YouTube, you're getting, I mean, fractions of a penny per watch, and so it's a whole different model, and it's a scary time actually for independent filmmakers, because it's funny that people say that we're in like this golden age of independent filmmakers, but I think that age is probably coming to a close because it's getting so hard to make money off of things. So yeah, I'm really glad to be in podcasting for that reason.
So is the itch still there to maybe do another feature or another film, or is that kind of in the past and you're focused on the podcasting now?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, my brother and I talk about it fairly frequently. We would do another movie, but we would have to do it with a distribution deal and at least a livable amount of money, because my brother and I had to make those movies. We had to live with our parents for about 5 years in our 20s, and that's putting a burden on them. And then of course that meant extra stress for us, because before we started filming, bringing out Bobby, 2 weeks before, our lead actress dropped out. She just fell off the face of the earth, and we had to recast. And that was when the weekend that my dad put his foot through the roof. He was up there pressure washing the roof in December. And so we, 2 weeks away from shooting a feature length film, I had to get up there and help my father re-roof a house in December. So there's just all those little extra things. It's yes, I'm a professional dad. Take me seriously, but also I can't leave him to do the whole roof himself,
Right.
It would take a real investment of finances to try to do it right, because you can only do so much on the cheap. It really does take a substantial amount of money to make a good film.
Exactly. So let's jump to a different project that you have listed. It's your dramatic Christian thriller, Cradle Robber.
Yeah.
Tell us about that story, because that's a very attention-getting title.
Yeah, it's a bit of a play on words, and it's a dark book. I think it's interesting the way that we've gone in Christianity, where everything has gone very, very positive, and everything has to be about, laughing and giggling and praising. Where if you read the Bible, I mean, our Lord was crucified, which is a very serious downer. And then, you read the Old Testament or even the book of Revelation. The end of the Bible is a big downer.
Right.
So I'm prefacing to say that my novel is pretty dark. But it's trying to speak at the heart of where we are right now as Christians in America, where we're so angry all the time because we're trying to force non-Christians to act like we are, like we want them to act. Where it's no, they're non-Christians. They're going to act like they don't believe in God, So there's this story of a man who is trying to get revenge using a time machine. So he goes back in time and tries to undo all the things in his life that that he has seen as being unjust, and in the process he ends up becoming something that he doesn't like. So it's a pretty dark story, but there is a romance for those who like romance, and it has a very uplifting ending. But it is a bit of a difficult read. I had to self-publish it because I couldn't find a publisher that was willing to even listen to me after the pitch.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but it's a book that I felt like I had to write this story. Because again, we as Christians right now are so angry in the United States, and it really isn't doing a lot of good for our ministry. So I'm trying to address that by showing what anger does in our lives.
So that's awesome. And I totally agree with you. I think that there's a place for the very uplifting, almost Hallmark movie-esque storytelling within Christianity. But I also think that if we're ever going to reach people, we got to be real and get to the real life. I think that there are certain limits that we can have.
Of course.
I don't believe we should do nudity, and I think there are ways to do dialogue without crossing lines.
Right.
But we need to be gritty and real to reach people.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of things that you can suggest. The power of suggestion is often much more powerful than just showing or telling something. And so that's often what I tried to do. And I wasn't trying to be like overly gross or dark. It was just trying to tell this story the way it needed to be told. A man who's really, really angry, which is something we don't see a lot of in Christian literature.
No. Or if we do, we see it for a minute and then suddenly the miracle happens and then he's not angry.
Right.
There's not a developed depth of a character.
Right.
Or you see the formerly angry person, now he's the wise counsel for the main character.
Right.
So I think that's absolutely needed because, again, we should edify the saints and lift up the saints, but we should also be using our gifts to bring people closer and say, hey, life isn't rainbows and butterflies the second you say yes to Christ. It's always going to be trials and tribulations, but we have a hope. There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. Amen. Yeah, it's tough. I think a lot of the questions we struggle with now in the modern Christianity is that we've forgotten so much of the Bible because we're focused only on the positives. And if you ever have a conversation with somebody when they say, "How could a loving God do X?" It's like, well, love is only one of God's attributes. And ultimately, things will tie back to love in the grand story, but you may not see it immediately. God is also very just. He's also described as wrathful and jealous. There are some things, a lot of things to wrestle with in the Bible. God is more than three-dimensional, and we keep trying to shove him into like a two-word sentence, or I don't think that's helpful.
No, not at all. And also, there's one aspect that sometimes, or a lot of times, we don't want to talk about, and that's personal responsibility.
Yeah,
is that maybe it's not necessarily God doing this, but it's the result of our choices. It's the natural consequence of our actions,
right?
That causes a lot of the trials, and He lets it happen so that we have a chance to learn and grow. Kind of like sometimes you have to let your son or daughter fall off the bike so they learn how to keep their balance on the bicycle. Yeah, right. They'll get a scraped knee, but you pick them back up, you love on them, and you help them go forward. So sometimes God lets us get those skinned knees and scraped palms so that we can grow.
Yeah, He does. Yeah.
Now I want to go back and learn about your testimony. How did you come to Christ? What led you there? And who influenced you most in your journey to be able to find a relationship with the Lord?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was 10 years old. And it was the first day that I'd ever gone skiing before. And I was not a natural skier. And I flipped over on my skis and hurt myself. And I was in some pain. And my mom had this idea that night, hey, let's go see this Christian play. And I was like, I don't want to go see a Christian play. I'm in pain. I just flipped over and hurt my neck. And she took us to go see this play called Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames. Which gives you a pretty strong idea of what it's about. It's very clear. There's one side, it's a bunch of people sort of just before their deaths. And then you see, maybe they get in a traffic accident or something. And then they're suddenly at the judgment seat. And one side of the stage represents hell and one side of the stage represents heaven. And then judgment is passed down on them based on whether or not, they trusted in the Lord. And it's a very clear, obvious message. And it's kind of one of those that we shrink away from right now. We don't like to do a heaven and hell message in modern Christianity, but it was effective. it's what I needed to see, very clear. Oh, this is how it is. And this is how I can go to heaven. I can trust in the Lord. So, I responded to the altar call after the show, and a volunteer came and gave me a Bible, or New Testament. And from there, I just started reading. And a lot of the influences were like Moody Radio. I used to listen to Moody Radio every night before I went to sleep. For years, I couldn't sleep without listening to Moody Radio. And then I had a lot of really solid people invest in me. I was a part of a campus life group in high school, and a lot of those guys, just the books they gave me were very helpful. And then I had this guy named Craig, who was a Campus Crusade for Christ leader, which is now called Cru, in college. And he invested in me in a lot of ways. Mostly it was, I just being able to watch him do his thing was incredibly helpful, to be able to see, because he was the first person I'd ever seen really actively try to share his faith. And so he would go door to door to different people that he'd met, like dorm room to dorm room, and knock on their door and try to visit with them and share the gospel with them and have conversations. And it was like, oh, and he would take me along to this so that I could see how it's done, which was incredibly helpful. And then I think a guy that had an incredible impact on me was Rich Cristiano. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a Christian filmmaker. He made Time Changer and Unidentified. And I worked on a few of his films. And he's one of those guys. I actually interviewed him for 2 episodes of Truce. And you can hear him in the Christian film ones. He's incredibly open to anybody who wants to talk about Christian films and wants to get into them. And he knows his market better than anybody else I've ever met. He just knows how it's done because he's also a distributor. But Rich can articulate very well the gospel and why he's doing his films the way he is. And then just as he was, and of course, the last time I hung out with him seriously, I guess the last time I really hung out with him seriously was still in the age of DVDs. And so he had a trunk full of DVDs of his films. And everywhere he went, he was handing out his DVDs to people, just like, at a bank or at a restaurant. He had them on him because he knew they were a witnessing tool. And Rich was he was a really interesting guy and a really good challenge to me to be like, okay, what do I believe? Am I taking this seriously? Am I really willing to let my work share the gospel, or am I just kind of telling a nice story? And he challenged me in a lot of ways. And I'm extremely grateful for Rich.
Wow, that's incredible. So you got taken to this play, Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames.
Yeah.
And I might have missed it. Who it was? Your parents that brought you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Our parents took us.
Okay. And were
against my will.
Were they believers at the time, or was this okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Yeah. My parents are really hard to describe in that they've been so supportive in so many ways that I didn't even understand until I was like into my 20s, to be like, oh, wow, they really went out of their way. But, instituting things like eat prayer at dinner, or there was a while that one of us was in charge of bringing like a devotional before dinner. My parents, I self-published a book I wrote it when I was 11 and 12 years old. And my mom, and it was also a Christian book, and my mom, proofread it with me and paid somebody to go through it and make sure the grammar was right. And then my dad had this contact that he worked with. They own a small heating and air conditioning company, and they worked with that guy to print the book. And then they had somebody make the cover, and then we took it around to independent bookstores and had them put it on their shelves and sell it on consignment. So like my parents were very, very supportive from an early age, when I was an early age, to get the work out there. So I think it's no wonder that I'm still making independent stuff, because my parents really encouraged that. And they really, really believed in my brother and I, and still do, and support us, which is an incredible gift.
Oh, absolutely. The support through the film making that you talked about earlier, with moving back in with the folks for about 5 years while the film was being done. That takes a lot of support, because it's very easy to not see the same vision.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the fact that you were inspired by a production, by something that was a creative art, they knew that that's where God was using it, because that's what God used to bring you to Him. Now God is going to use that to bring others to Him through you.
Right. Yeah. And I think for the pressure that they must have been getting from their friends to be like, oh, your kids are making a movie, are they? Or, oh, they're still in their 20s and they're living at home, are they? There's a lot of pressure around that stuff these days, a lot of stigma around that. But they were very supportive, especially I remember there's a scene in Between the Walls where the father character is reprimanding his son, and he's being really harsh at a piano. And that was one of the first days my parents came to the set. And they got to, sit in the back, and it's a movie set can be incredibly boring, incredibly boring for bystanders. But they came and they got to sit back and watch. And I feel like that was the moment that I connected with them, and that they kind of started to understand what we were doing and what we were about. And that was really great. And, to be able to be filming a scene and then turn around and you see your parents have got tears in their eyes when they're watching the film, this dramatic scene you're making, like, oh, wow, I guess we're doing it, It was, they were very supportive.
Was there ever a moment during the production of that, because it sounds like for the most part the father figure, or the father in this movie, was not flattering. Did you have to explain, Dad, this is not you?
Yes. Yeah, we did. Yeah. And it's pretty obvious. I mean, it's a fairly obvious thing. My dad should never have gotten that impression. But we did have that conversation. But no, he was always very supportive, and actually helped a lot in the pre-production, because the house we were shooting in, we had to rewire in order to get enough power to run the lights. So he was very supportive, and we did the same thing for Bringing Out Bobby. We had to rewire a house. Which is no small task, to be able to get some outlets that you could run the lights with, because they draw a lot of current.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he was very supportive.
Very good. So you'd make the movies. You've gotten a couple books. The one that you wrote at 10, 11 years old. And now you're doing podcasting.
Yeah.
How did you make that transition? What got you into doing the podcast?
Yeah, my brother and I, when we made Bringing Up Bobby, it was at the dawn of podcasting. I think the movie came out at 2008 or 2009, and podcasting was a thing back then, and not many people were doing it. But we thought, oh well, we'll do this podcast thing to try to help promote the movie, and it did not. We started out with 30 downloads an episode, and we ended up in 15. It actually got worse somehow as we went along for 2 years, and we kind of crept away from the movie pretty fast and started trying to report stories. So we did episodes on all sorts of different things, and we would go out on location. We did a Promise Keepers event. We went and covered things at the county fair, but always kind of, what is God doing in this situation kind of stuff. And I loved doing it because, again, it was cheap. You could have a lot of fun with it, and people in the Christian world were not really in that realm. Even now, Christian podcasts are mostly sermons.
Right.
It's there's not a lot of sort of creative work going on, and so I put that aside after we made the movies, and so I could write the books. And then I just kept feeling like I had all these stories I wanted to tell, and I really wanted to go back to doing podcasting, which is, bananas. I guess I'm a little schizophrenic when it comes to mediums. I think if I stuck with one, I'd have more success. But I like the podcasting, and I plan to stick with it because it's so versatile, and yeah, like I said, and you can reach people so far away. And in the model of making the podcast, it's much more efficient for fundraising than a film is, because people don't have to pay for it, so it's much better ministry that way. But also, you can put ads in podcasts, you can and you can have donations, and since it doesn't cost as much to make the show, you don't need to raise as much money, which is just great. Yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
Absolutely. Now, where did you come up with the name Truce, and how did that come about, calling it the Truce Podcast and everything like that?
Yeah, I couldn't get away from the word. I kept trying to think of a better word because truce sounds like truths. And I get people confused with that. But again, I feel like we in Christianity, we're so in the mood to fight right now. And I think a lot of our desire to fight comes from a lack of understanding of how we got to where we are, and how we're perceived, and how our actions are perceived. So I see a truce as two parties coming together to actually hash something out without a war. And so we've had this idea of a culture war going on for years and years, and there's some value to those concepts, but a lot of us don't know why we're angry, or what our stake is in this game, or what the other side thinks. And so the truce is all about trying to bridge that gap and to kind of prepare us to see how we got here. So like season 3, which I don't know when this is going to be released, but it starts on October 29th. We're going to start with one fun episode, and then we're going to go into this long story that will take months to tell, but we're going to track from the fall of the Russian czars to the rise of communism in Russia, and then how that impacted us in the American church. Because we, in the 1900s, we became obsessed with like, oh, communism's doing that, I'll do the opposite. They're going collectivism, we're going to go with individual ownership of land. They're going with atheism, we're going to hold on to Christianity super hard. And so a lot of what many of us grew up in is a reaction to communism. And so we're going to paint that picture of what it was communism. How did it come about? How did the Romanovs, the last czars, fall? And then we're going to pick up in the United States, like how did Christianity in America become so tied to capitalism? Not that that's a bad thing, not that capitalism's a bad thing, but how did we get there? Right. What was that logical leap to tie Christianity to capitalism? So I'm really interested in the history of getting to a certain idea, and how we got there. And hopefully in that process, we can learn how better to witness to others and how better to live godly lives. Yeah.
I think that is an important thing to investigate for all Christians is, learning our history as a culture and trying to take off sometimes the lenses of culture through which we see Jesus, because I think that's what's hurting the church in America so much, is that we've got our lenses on and we're not actually seeing the true Jesus in many ways.
Right.
There's a Republican Jesus or a Democrat Jesus. There's a liberal Jesus or a conservative Jesus, and it's like, no. And this is an image I've talked to several people before about. I have this image that Jesus is there on the cross in the middle of a game of tug of war between the left wing and the right wing, and the place to be is in the middle where he's at, and he's struggling to bring people there, but we're nailing him to the cross so his arms can't bring us together. And that simplifies the divisions, I think, a little bit, but that it gives a kind of a general idea that if you're staunch on one side or the other, you're not necessarily where Jesus would be. Right.
Yeah, and it can be tough. It can be tough if you're involved in politics or government to walk that line. But for most of us who don't hold an office, we forget that our mission is not to make the world look like we want it to. Our mission is to share Jesus.
Such a great conversation. I can't wait to share the rest of it with you here in just a moment. Now, if you like what we're doing with Gifts for Glory Ministries, things like this podcast, great events like PureFest, and the amazing comedy of Well-Versed Comedy, would you consider supporting us through Patreon? Become a patron at patreon.com/giftsforglory. Again, that's patreon.com/gifts4glory. And get some really cool perks for helping us grow and produce some great content like this podcast. We're also working to get to a nonprofit status as a ministry, so your support through Patreon is going to help get us there. That's patreon.com/giftsforglory. And thank you so much for supporting and helping make Gifts of Glory happen. We've got more of this amazing conversation in just a moment. This is the Gifts of Glory podcast, celebrating and promoting men and women of God using their gifts, talents, and passions to honor and glorify God. Back in just a second.
We forget that our mission is not to make the world look like we want it to. Our mission is to share Jesus. And it's a much better mission, and it's a much more effective mission. And so often I think we get weighed down by this idea that this is the worst it's ever been. Where if you look at history, there's this sort of rising and falling action that goes over and over again. History just kind of is in waves of, you'll have a revival, and then you'll have a dark time, and you'll have a revival, you'll have a dark time. And we forget that. And we forget that God can and does change people's lives. And it isn't really as important that I get a certain bill passed or I get my neighbor to behave like I want them to behave. It's much more important that I share the gospel and that my life be a good witness. Now, of course, I say that as a fallen man who has made mistakes today. I need grace just as much as anybody else. I just as much as anybody else. And when I turn away from that, that's when I become a monster. When I forget that my neighbor needs Jesus just as much as I do. And hopefully through the show and the book and the movies and stuff, people will be inspired to try to pursue the real Jesus instead of, this perfect society that we want to create.
Yeah, I mean, essentially it comes down to our job is not to win elections, it's to win hearts.
Yeah.
And yeah, it'd be great if we could pass the legislation that prevents every kind of evil, but you're never going to prevent evil until we've won the hearts and minds and souls for Christ that would want to do this kind of thing. So it doesn't matter what's legal or illegal. What matters is what the heart of people say and believe.
Yeah. Amen. Man, there it is.
Pass the plate. Amen.
Yeah. Well done. Let's get this wrapped up.
So before we dive into the last segment of the show, I wanted to talk to you about improv. I know that you're doing it in a secular setting.
Yep.
So how does that work? Are you with people that play pretty clean, or are you still in that kind of that dark place that we talked about earlier, I think before we went on the air, about where you were training at Second City and there's just a lot of dark comedy?
Right. I'm part of the Laugh staff here in Jackson, Wyoming, and that's LAFF, Of course, it's an improv troupe. You can't spell anything correctly. Right. We all have silly names for our troops. But it is a secular troupe, and we tend to say it's going to be about on par with a PG-13 movie. But my brother and I keep it at, PG. And the other group, we have a few other Christians in the group, and then there's a bunch of non-believers in the group. And so I can't really change them, tell them what to do. We've had a lot of conversations over the years as we've kind of weeded out some of the bad seeds in the group and been able to say, like, listen, it doesn't actually take that much talent to be dirty. Anybody can be funny and be dirty. Just drop a couple swear words. But to be funny and be clean shows real talent. And honestly, it'll draw a much, much bigger and much more committed audience if we do that. So my brother and I have had conversations over the years about, hey, this thing that happened made me uncomfortable. And honestly, the troupe that we have now plays so well together and understands and loves each other to the point where we respect each other to not really go that far. Now it's improv, and of course, some of these people, want to go that way, so it will go that way sometimes. But as a believer, as a player, you have the right to step back and not participate, and just kind of let those things go. Now, improv, for me, is a tremendous release. It's a great way to be out in the community. It's a great way to be a part of a family, because our troupe has been together now for almost 11 years, and. Wow. Yeah, and almost all of it has been with a similar configuration too, and so we've been through births and deaths and marriages and everything together, and so we're like a family, an extension of a family together. So when something bad goes on in somebody's life, we can come together and laugh and cheer each other up and celebrate the good times. So that in itself is a ministry that, we can build this family. But also, I get to know so many people in the community because they know me from the Laugh Staff. And so people will just stop me at the grocery store or on a hiking path or something and say something, which is a great way to build relationships. And I'm a firm believer that most Christians, I'm not saying I'm going to be dogmatic about it, but we should all have something that we do in the secular world that is just out there in the community. If it's a volleyball league or a softball league or improv or something, so that we can actually meet and build those relationships where we can share the gospel. And so that's what improv is for us. It's both a release and a joy to do it. And I love being a part of it. And it's also it's a way to build relationships to hopefully share the gospel with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have Well-Versed Comedy, which is our faith-based team. And when I tell people we're faith-based, they wonder, so you're doing like Bible jokes? And no, we just do clean PG comedy that anybody can come to, whether you want to bring your kid or your grandma, whoever. And whether we share gospel from the stage that night or people just get to know us, there's those open doors for ministry because we come in and we're different, because we use a God filter to create things that are pure and really just fun. And you don't have to look around the room and make sure, is it okay if I laugh at that?
Of course. There's this moment my brother told me about. He used to play on a team in Cleveland, and they would play, perform at bowling alleys and in bars and stuff like that. And there was this couple who were Christians, and they would go to like every improv thing that they could to try to build relationships, because they knew like nobody's going to Cleveland Improv, No, there's more people on stage than in the audience in Cleveland. But they knew, okay, this is an environment where I can connect with people and I can be a part of their lives and hopefully share the gospel. And so they had these, groupies who would follow them around and became a part of their lives. So even like if you're out there and you don't think you could get on stage and be brave and do it, the improv world is dark. The theater world is dark. But if you are willing to be a supportive audience member or even, crew member or volunteer, that can speak volumes into that dark world. Like it just shines a huge light into that dark world. Or even same with stand-up comedy. I'm sure you have a lot. Well, I know you have a lot of that in Chicago. That too is a very dark world, and you've got a lot of people who have no hope. And comedy seems like their way out. And if you, even as an audience member, can go there and build a relationship like those people in Cleveland, I mean, what a great testimony.
Oh, absolutely. And one of my favorite shows that we ever did as a comedy troupe is we did a comedy night at a bar in one of the suburbs just west of Chicago. Yeah. And we were the only improv group. And all the other performers were stand-up, and each one was raunchier than the last.
Right.
The lady that went on before us, it was it made a couple of our ladies on our team really want to just leave and not perform. But
Right.
we prayed before we took the stage, and we went up there and we did Foursquare and some simple improv games, played clean, and I don't say this as a boast other than to boast in God that we got the loudest reactions of the night because we were
Sure.
different.
Mhm.
And we literally were the gate through which the light of Christ walked in that room.
Mhm.
And my hope is that even though we didn't witness that night, that there will be some kind of an impact from that night that will have like a residual ripple effect on people's lives. And I think anybody that has a gift, if you use it in that way, don't feel discouraged that you're not able to share the gospel in that moment,
Right.
because the presence of the Lord will go with you, and he can still minister even if his name is not spoken.
Right. Yeah, and you might be there to testify to those other people on stage, or just build a relationship there. You never know. It's he will do his thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, as we wrap up, I warned you before we came on the air that one of the things we do is called the interrogation. Got 7 questions, just top of your head answer, just to kind of get to know you on the way out.
Yeah.
So our first question of the interrogation is, you live out in Wyoming. What teams do you root for out there? What
None.
pro teams?
I don't
None?
follow any sports at all. I used to work for the Cleveland Indians baseball team in the scoreboard department. I was a video editor for them. But I don't have time. I have a full-time job and a podcast. Yeah. I got no time.
All right. Completely different vein. What's your favorite scripture?
My favorite scripture, I think probably be still and know that I am God.
Nice.
Because I'm kind of a doer. I like to just do and be going and moving, and to be still. I mean, that's hard for me.
I think in many ways that is a male struggle, is to be still and know instead of be doing and trust. It's very hard to do that. So question number 3. You've been doing your podcast for a little while. What's been the most embarrassing moment in producing a podcast?
Oh, well, I try to put out like a really high quality show. And so I spend so much time on my show. I was interviewing, the episode hasn't come out yet, but I was interviewing this expert on Russian history for this communism series. And it couldn't have been 10 feet away from my window. Somebody started using a leaf blower as I was interviewing her using Skype. And I don't own my house, and I don't own the property that they were leaf blowing. And so I don't have any control over them to turn them off. And the lady, she was so giving to me and so patient with me. I was having a hard time hearing her because of the leaf blower. And then she kept hearing this buzz sound, which won't be in the episode because I'm going to re-record my end. But I was so embarrassed. I mean, it took me forever to find an expert in Russian history that would talk to me. And then I was having trouble hearing her. And on this series, I was starting from zero. I knew almost nothing about Russian history. And so even my questions weren't 100%. So she kind of led the conversation, which was perfect. As an interviewer, sometimes that's exactly what you want. Just take it, go for it. Tell me the good stuff. And so I was really embarrassed by that.
Oh, wow. Definitely can sympathize with the background noise. I try to record at my church as much as possible, but usually I have to be at home. And we have 3 cats, and they all need attention the second they hear me talking to another voice.
Of course.
So, okay. So let's move forward. Most rewarding moment in creating your podcast?
Gosh, there have been a number of moments. There were these guys in Florida. I went to what is it called? The Podcast Movement Conference in Florida, in Orlando this year, which was expensive but very beneficial. And I don't know how to describe it other than it was a supernatural moment. I was walking around with my friend Eric Nevins, who's the head of the Christian Podcasters Association Facebook group that we're both a part of. Mm-hmm. And we sat down with this one group of people for lunch, and I was just like, this is not right. We need to go sit with somebody else. So we got up and we just sat down with these two other guys, and it struck up, an immediate connection with two guys who aren't Christians. And it was like, it just in sharing about my show, we got into talking about the gospel and what their relationship with was God. And throughout the course of our time at the conference, several days, we were able to keep touching base with them, and we prayed with them. And it was just like, I don't know. There are certain moments, divine moments, that if you've been a believer for a while, that you can point to and be like, God was in that moment, yeah. And you're like, I don't know what that was about. But that was incredibly rewarding. And then they went and listened to my show, like after we talked, and to have them come back and start all these conversations with me about episodes, and want to know more. And it was able to kind of speak into their lives and hopefully, bump them towards the Lord. And that was, that's what it's about, Mm-hmm. And I enjoy doing the show, and I've enjoyed doing the movies and stuff, but it's a lot like I said, you just throw ministry out there and you have no idea what's going to happen with it a lot of the time. But then to have it integrate with the real world, boy, that is great stuff. That was fantastic. And if you could be praying for those two guys, that would be awesome. I stay in contact with them a lot. I text them a lot with stuff. So nice. Anyway, yeah, that was great.
That's one of those moments where that I found with my comedy, and I'm sure that with the different things you do, that sometimes the thing that you're doing isn't what you use, but it's the thing that opens the door for you to be able to do the witnessing and the ministry.
Yeah.
Doing the comedy has opened some doors for me to go and teach improv at a shelter for women who survived sex trafficking.
Wow.
And, we teach improv games and just have fun, trying to build self-esteem and confidence and help them find their voice. And even if none of that happens, 1 hour a month, I'm able to get them to laugh like little girls and kind of forget everything they've been through.
Right.
And so it's just a huge blessing. And the comedy wasn't necessarily the ministry, but it opened the door for the ministry to happen.
Right. Well, and improv has a lot of great life lessons in it. Like if you're like in back-to-back scenes, if you mess up in the first scene, you've got to be able to drop your mistake, mm-hmm. or else you're going to ruin the second scene. And that has been a really great lesson for me in life, that like I cannot keep dragging my past with me. I've got to drop it, or else I'm going to ruin whatever is coming next.
Right.
And improv is great for teaching stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely. Improv is so versatile and has so many life applications. I'm really just blessed and excited to see what God can do with it, because it's starting to grow. There's a Christian Improv Comedy Association that they have a yearly conference. They did a conference in Milwaukee this year. Next year will be in Dallas, and then the following year will be probably back in Milwaukee. So I think Christians doing improv is really starting to gain some traction. So you are not alone, even though maybe you feel that way out there in a while.
No. I don't actually. I've performed with other groups since being a part of the Laugh staff, and I think we've been spoiled being together for 11 years. We just know each other so well. Mm-hmm. It's a real blessing. I love doing improv with other people because it's a surprise. But man, I don't know if I would trade my team for any other team.
Awesome. All right. So my next question was, what keeps you up at night? What scares you?
Ooh, boy, that gets personal. It's tough. I'll tell you the thing with being an independent producer and having been independent basically my whole career is I don't want to stay independent because we don't like to talk about money in the church. But a reality that we need to pay Christian artists to do their thing. And what keeps me up at night is the terror that I'm going to continue doing this for free when it's my show takes me 15 to 30 hours per episode to produce.
Wow.
It's just an insane amount of work. And that conflicts a lot with a personal ministry. It conflicts a lot with trying to build a family because I'm still single, and trying to forward life. So my fear is that like the movies were all over the world and stuff, but I would have made much more money working minimum wage. And that is not an exaggeration. I would have made a lot more money at minimum wage. Same with the book. I mean, the book, I'm still in the hole. The podcast, I'm still in the hole. So I guess what keeps me up at night is that terror that like I'm going to be doing ministry and doing the Lord's work, but I won't be able to support myself. And I'm not sure how many years I can keep up the multiple jobs thing, which I've done, now for a very long time. So that's the thing that keeps me up is like, how can I make this podcast more sustainable so that I'm not as stressed about making it, but also how can I do it in a way that I can eke out a living? I'm not talking like a mansion. I'm talking like poverty level. If I can make as much as your average missionary, that would be a godsend. Just to do the show. And that's tough. I feel bad. I don't know if you ask for money very often for your show, but I have to ask like every episode or every other episode. And I hate doing it because so many people have had negative reactions to, or it's negative memories of their church and money. That's like one of the main hiccups people have with religion, but it's very important that we support artists because we can reach a lot of people that maybe might not be watching movies or might not be reading Christian books, or, the podcasts can go out so far and have a really, they're very personal, the podcasts, to the point where if I ever have two sons, if God ever grants me those two sons, I want to name them after two of my favorite podcasters.
Well, Dave Staron sounds pretty good to me.
Dave Staron. It's actually, if I'm being honest, God help me, but my two of my favorite guys are Tom and Ray from Car Talk. If you know Car Talk, I love those guys, and I would love to name and of course, I doubt if God could provide the right woman, we'll have sons named Tom and Ray, but we'll see. That's getting a little ahead of things. But yeah, what keeps me up at night is worrying about is this going to stay an unsustainable hobby, or is it going to be something that can grow into something that could support a family and possibly, God willing, other producers, which would be incredible because my show it's a journalism show, and it's very involved and they're very research heavy, very edit heavy. So if I could hire other people to come onto the team, we can make much better stories and put them out more frequently than I do now. So yeah, anyway, God willing, hopefully that'll happen. That would be really great.
Wow, very cool. So my next to last question is, so far, what's been your favorite guest or interview that you've done?
Wow. I mean, I've been so excited about some. There's something about spunk that you have in an interview. And there's this woman named Samantha Morris who did our Girolamo Savonarola episode, which is actually one of our most popular ones, even though it's a mouthful. She was just so excited about what we were talking about. And she's just a historian. It's like her side gig. She has a full-time job, but she was so excited about the material that I think the audience could feel it, and we had a really good back and forth. And I just loved talking to her, even though she wasn't like some great big star. Like in season 3, I talked to Phil Vischer, the creator of VeggieTales. And we had a really good time talking, but Sam was just a delight. And I've been trying to find any excuse to talk to her again, and I haven't found it yet. But there's something about that kind of spunk that I really enjoyed.
Very nice. All right, final question of the interrogation, number 7. who would be your ultimate bucket list guest for the Truce Podcast?
Oh my goodness. I've been asked this before, and I don't really know, because it always depends. You know what? I'm going to throw it out there. I tried really hard to get Jackie Hill Perry on my show. I don't know if you know who Jackie Hill Perry is.
I just found her on Twitter and saw her story in her book, Gay Girl, Good God.
Right. It's an excellent book. It is an excellent book and beautifully written. And she handles the topic of homosexuality better than anybody else I've ever seen. And she's very inspiring, but she's also a very big name.
Right.
So I couldn't even break through the layers of the filters to get to talk to her, to even get to talk to anybody about booking her. But God willing, someday I think that would be a really big one, because homosexuality is a very big topic in Christianity right now, and she handles it marvelously.
Oh yeah, and full disclosure, I've been trying to find a back door to get in contact with the right person to get in contact with her, because I saw her story when I saw her as a suggested follow on Twitter.
Yeah.
I said, "What's this about?" And I saw the name of the book, and my first reaction was, "Oh, this is one of those books where it's like maybe justifying the other side of things." But then I realized this is a redemption story,
right? And it's beautifully told. Yeah.
So if I find the back door and I can get in contact, I will, give her a strong suggestion to reach out to you.
That would be great.
Because I did have some luck. I was able to interview Cameron Arnett from Overcomer.
Oh, wow.
He was on my show about a month ago, right when Overcomer was really going strong in the theater. So sometimes if you just find the right door and ask.
Right. You never know.
Bible says you have not because you ask not. So
right.
I know that's taking it out of context a little bit.
It is, yeah. But it's true. I mean, it's amazing the people you can contact on Twitter. You can get past their secretaries and their layers of filters and stuff. I wasn't able to get through to her yet, but God willing, someday. Maybe after this Russian series, we'll see.
Well, the Russians have influence on our social media so strong. Maybe there's your connection.
Oh my goodness! I don't even want to dabble. Yeah.
Yeah, that may be a little bit too political for. But so that's the interrogation.
Nice.
The final question of the interview is for someone who's listening that maybe want to get into filmmaking or podcasting or even writing. What would you say is your wise counsel and your advice for those people?
Work on somebody else's stuff first. That's the best thing. Play with somebody else's money and time. That, especially in the movie world, go work on somebody else's films. The worst thing you can do is go to film school. And I can say that because I went to film school. You can always find a show that will let you help out for free, even in small towns, to just intern, be a grunt. You'd be amazed, the film world, the stuff that you can learn being a grunt, because there's all this downtime, and a lot of people are very open about sharing it. So go and just help on somebody else's stuff. And that takes humility, and you're going to have to work for free for a while. But I think that's the best way. Also, you could go to conferences are a great thing as well. Very big help. But I'd also say try. It's hard to give you this advice because in the publishing world, especially in the Christian publishing world, they are pushing everybody to be exactly the same. And it's a real shame. It's going to set Christian publishing back so far. But they're really pushing everybody to write women's fiction from a first person personal point of view. Meaning instead of you don't want to, not first person, third person personal. So you've still got that sort of godlike voice. But the godlike voice doesn't know everything that's coming. There's no foreshadowing. It has to be told just from the perspective of one person, because the Christian worlds, the publishers want to treat everybody, want to reach out to the lowest common denominator is the nice way to say it. The mean way to say it is to say that they're treating the audience like they're stupid. But it's true. They are. And what sells now is women's fiction, Amish romance, normal romance, and almost nothing else in the Christian fiction world. So what they tell you is to write that because that's what sells. I even had an agent tell me one time that he wouldn't pick me up unless I agreed to write under a woman's name. Because nobody was going to buy something that was written by a man in the market. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. It really is, the Christian market is in that vein is really saturated by women's stuff. As for podcasting, I would say go do the thing, just try a bunch of different things. Just like try different things before you release an episode. Go interview people, try like what I'm doing, like a journalistic thing, or do storytelling and just see what works. Because the beauty of podcasting is it's relatively cheap. And so just go have fun and then settle on the thing that feels right. Because I enjoy doing these kind of interviews and I love interviewing people, but I can't do an interview show. It's not in me. I'm much more attuned to try to tell these giant, complex, historic stories in a fun way. That's much more what I'm attuned to. And I'm really the only one doing it in our market, which is kind of an advantage. So try to kind of weigh those things out. Where is there space in the market and what do you like to do? And they try to say in marketing that you want to have yourself stand out. So there's like this whole big movement on YouTube. This is maybe a longer answer than you wanted, but to try to take a normal thing and do it a little differently and have like a gimmick to it. So there are people who like will do an interview show, but every couple of minutes you have to try a hotter pepper. Or I think it's a wing. I can't remember, like a chicken wing. But so that way you have these big celebrities who are having an interview, but every few minutes they get to a hotter and hotter wing. And that conceit makes it fun for the audience. It kind of breaks it up from the interview. Or I'm not condoning the show, but like Drunk History, if you've seen those YouTube videos, or the Comedy Central where they have a drunk person try to tell a story. It's a history show, but the conceit is, the person narrating is drunk. So it's different, like having a twist really helps. Like an angle helps tremendously when you're marketing, or when you're just trying to come up with an idea for your show. What's the next topic going to be? It helps if you have some kind of specific gimmick that you can go back to.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. I had a blast, and I think that anybody listening is really going to enjoy your story and also learning about just the different things that you've been involved with. Because I think you've got a lot going on, and God's going to bless it. And just hope that you are finding time to take that all-important Sabbath every once in a while. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, maybe that's the best advice to give to creators: is you make time for Sabbaths. Because otherwise you're not going to be putting out good work. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Chris, they can find you online and Facebook at Truce Podcast, and they can also find you on your website, trucepodcast.com.
Right.
And anywhere else that they need to look to find you or find anything that you've been up to?
Sure. Yeah, you can get the books on any ebook platform, and that's Cradle Robber. And it's a little dark, but I think you can do it. And I think there's a lot of enjoyable parts. And then you can find the movies Bringing Up Bobby and Between the Walls on Amazon Prime. And Bringing Up Bobby is also on PureFlix if you have a subscription to PureFlix.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
And one of the cool things is if you have that streaming service, they could help you out by just playing that movie overnight when they go to bed after they've already watched it once and get you that extra 9 cents overnight.
You could. The thing is, people joke about that, but you might be spending more money on electricity than I would get. So if you just want to donate 10 cents to me, that's totally fine. It might be more worth your time to just send me 10 cents.
The stamp costs more. Oh, but you just do PayPal or Patreon.
I do indeed.
So those links are on your website,
yes.
trucepodcast.com, Chris Staron, thank you so much for coming on, and wish you all the best, and I'll race you to get these big interviews.
Nice. Yeah. Hey, well, yeah, I appreciate it. It'll be fun. Thanks, Dave.